Hello everyone. In today's lecture, it's about short-run Phillips curve and the long-run Phillips curve. It actually tells you about the relationship between inflation and unemployment. And as far as the A2 economic syllabus is concerned, it's connected with 10.2.5. So here we go. First, we have to know what is meant by the term inflation. Persistent rise in general price level of goods and services in an economy over a period of 1 year. Unemployment, a situation when a person is able to work, available to work, seeking work, but could not find a job. So this is the introduction of inflation and unemployment. We are also aware about the conflict between inflation and unemployment as macroeconomic objectives, being as macroeconomic objectives and having a conflict. And we have studied these two concepts in AS macroeconomic, that is the inflation and the unemployment. Also, we are aware about their conflict. So economists have devoted considerable attention to the relationship between inflation and unemployment. So they have studied how changes in the inflation rate can affect unemployment and how changes in the unemployment rate can affect the inflation rate. They have also examined how government policy designed to reduce the unemployment rate influences both the unemployment rate and the inflation rate. On one of the best known trade-off has traditionally been inflation and unemployment. So if the governments try to reduce the inflation, for example, by using fiscal and monetary policy, by the way, you must be aware with the monetary policy and the fiscal policy. These are known as a demand side policy. The other policy we are available with is the supply side policy. And we have covered it in AS macroeconomics. You may refer to the videos. So then unemployment rises. For example, equally any attempt at reducing unemployment by, for example, cutting the interest rate or increasing government expenditure, that is known as the expenditure or the expansionary policies, will result in higher inflation. So the ideal situation for an economy would be to have a low and steady rate of inflation together with a low level of unemployment. So generally, this has proved to be impossible to achieve. Now, with our topic here with us is the Phillips curve. So in 1959, Phillips plotted the data for UK for the period from 1861 to 1957 to show how an inverse relation between inflation and unemployment. And guess what? Actually, he observed the data, and the data was very scattered. So he used the method of line of best fit, where he derived the relation. So these were the dotted lines. These were many of the data that he collected. And after all, he deduced the relation between the unemployment and inflation. So now the topic is contributed into two main directions. One is known as the short-run Phillips curve, also known as the traditional Phillips curve, and one is known as the long-run Phillips curve. So the short-run Phillips curve tells us it shows an inverse relation between price level, that is inflation, and unemployment. So here how it goes, like when the unemployment reduces, so people got more jobs and their purchasing power increases, raising to demand pull inflation. We are aware that there are two main types of causes of inflation. One is the demand pull inflation. The other one is cost push inflation. Very good. So as can be seen, a fall in unemployment from U1 to U2 would lead to a rise in inflation from P1 to P2. So this is a straightforward trade-off that a government could choose the levels of inflation and unemployment they thought correct for their country. So this relation broke down in several countries in the 1970s when stagflation occurred, a situation where there is a rise in the rate of inflation as well the rate of unemployment, known as stagflation. So the traditional Phillips curve, also known as the short-run Phillips curve, the traditional Phillips curve suggests the government can select its best combination of unemployment and inflation and can trade off the two. Now, for example, if the current unemployment rate is 8%, current unemployment rate is 8%, and the inflation rate is 4%. At this point, 8%, the unemployment rate, and the inflation rate is 4%. If a government may seek to lower unemployment from this point to this point, so to by 5%, so by implementing expansionary fiscal or monetary policy tools. So while accepting this improvement may have to be bought at the cost of higher inflation from 4% to 6%. So this is the introduction and the establishment of the short-term Phillips curve and a little bit of history about Phillips or the preface. Now we move on to the analysis part. AO1, AO2, AO3, these are the three assessment objectives we need to capture in paper 4. So analysis part, AO2. In the analysis part, also known as the process or the mechanism. So it obviously tells about the causes and the effects of something. So we need to discuss this shifts in short-run Phillips curve can be asked in the MCQs. So now, the cost by changes, it is due to the SRAS. And what is SRAS? Short-run aggregate supply. We have covered in AS macroeconomics, unit number 5. So what are the reasons? One reason could be like the changes in short-run aggregate supply. For instance, if I write, one point could be changes in inflation expectation, changes in inflation expectation. We are talking about the shift, and I believe you have the idea about the shift and the movement. Okay, so let's first recall it. So if on the graph, either we have an upward sloping graph or a downward sloping graph available with us. If on a single plane curve, if we move from one point to another point, this movement is known as movement along the curve from point A to B or from B to A. This is known as movement along the curve. But if we migrate from, or if we jump from one curve to another curve, curve 1, curve 2. So if we move or if we jump from one curve to another curve, this is known as shift. So this is a very quick recall. Let us go back to the topic, that is the reasons that we are going to find. What are the reasons that shifts the SRPC? SRPC means short-run Phillips curve. So changes in inflation expectation. So let's discuss it. What is meant by the term changes in inflation expectations? So if people expect higher inflation, the SRPC shifts to the right. So let me draw it to you. SRPC, short-run Phillips curve. So SRPC1, SRPC2. So rightwards here. So if people expect higher inflation, the SRPC shifts to the right. This is because workers and firms will demand higher wages and prices, leading to higher inflation and unemployment for a given level of output. So workers now demand increase in wages in anticipation of higher future inflation. And as the cost of their labor increases, some firms will reduce the number of people they employ. That is the increase in unemployment. So other reasons could be positive supply shock, positive supply shock. But this is not much required in the theory that we are discussing right now, negative supply shock as well. So these are the reasons for the SRPC shift, short-run Phillips curve. Talking about the movement along the SRPC, this is due to the caused by changes in aggregate demand. So it could be increase in aggregate demand, and it could be decrease in aggregate demand. Okay, so these are the reasons or the points that could be asked by the examiner in your MCQs. Okay, so further we move on to the long run. So the topic says short run Phillips curve and then the long run Phillips curve. So the long run Phillips curve, also known as the expectations augmented Phillips curve. The expectations augmented Phillips curve, number one. Number second, it's also known as the expectations added Phillips curve. Expectations added Phillips curve. So these are the interchangeable names. And here's a graph, the diagram. Okay, so LRPC, then on the y-axis, we have the price level. And on the x-axis, we have the unemployment. Y-axis price level. And on the x-axis, we have the unemployment. In a moment or so, I'll be briefing you about the NRU. So first, look back to the LRPC. The LRPC illustrates that in the long run, there is no trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Remember, in the SRPC, yes, there is a trade-off, but in long-run Phillips curve, there is no trade-off between unemployment and inflation. So if we talk about more of LRPC, so LRPC is represented as a vertical line at the natural rate of unemployment that the NRU would be discussing shortly. So meaning monetary policy cannot permanently lower unemployment. So if we go into the more of the explanation to it, so first is the vertical line. That is graphically the LRPC is a vertical line at the natural rate of unemployment, indicating that there is no long-run relationship between inflation and unemployment. The LRPC voiced that in the long run, the economy will always return to its natural rate of unemployment, regardless the inflation rate. Talking about the monetary policy limitation, the LRPC implies that the monetary policy can only affect the inflation rate in the short run, but not the long run unemployment rate. Expectations. The concept of LRPC is closely tied to the idea that workers and business or firms adjust their expectations about inflation, which ultimately leads to the economy returning to the natural rate of unemployment. So while the short-term Phillips curve suggests a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, the LRPC highlights that this relationship is only temporary. And in the long run, the economy will return to its natural rate of unemployment. So having said about too much about NRU, let us have a look what is NRU. So actually, you have covered in AS about the full employment. So if I say the natural rate of unemployment represents the level of unemployment that exists when the economy is operating at its full potential, with all factors of production being used efficiently. So talk about the potential level or the full employment, you may use different economic model. In AS economics, you have used the PPC, production possibility curve, to show the potential or the full potential of an economy. The other economic model that you have used, LRAS, long run aggregate supply. Here, you are seeing a classical LRAS. On the other hand, you also known as the Keynesian LRAs. Okay. So you are also aware with the point of full employment. And if we talk about that in A2 economics, you have covered unemployment on three bases: the causes of unemployment, the demand and supply, the one cause, voluntary and involuntary. Okay, so one of the factors, the equilibrium and the disequilibrium, the number third. So if I talk about what is the national rate of unemployment, so the difference between the labor force and the people who are accepting the job, or also known as the job acceptance. So the difference between number of people in the labor force and the number of people accepting a job at the current market wage rate. Let me put it this way. So this is a difference. So the difference between these two factors, that is the labor force, and those who are joining or accepting the market at the current market wage rate. So the natural rate of unemployment is the rate of unemployment when the labor market is in equilibrium. The natural rate of unemployment is caused by a combination of frictional and structural unemployment. Okay, so this is the introduction of NRU. Yes, if you need some more of the details, it is covered in the topic 4.3 in A2 economics. So the lecture is there, the recorded lecture is there. You may go through with it. Okay, talking about the NAIRU, NAIRU. The NAIRU, the non-accelerated inflation rate of unemployment, is the lowest unemployment rate that can be sustained without causing wages and growth and inflation to rise. But technically, there is no such difference that we are going to share in our model. That is, we are going to discuss the Longrun Phillips curve. Normally, we either can we use the NRU or we can use the NAIRU, NAIRU. So having said it, now let's get back to the more of the details of the short-run and the long-run Phillips curve together. Long-run and short-run Phillips curve together. So in the short run, there is a trade-off between the central bank's monetary policy objectives, because unemployment and inflation move in opposite direction in response to changes in interest rate. So by reducing interest rate, the central bank could lower unemployment if it is willing to accept higher inflation, or by increasing interest rate, it could reduce inflation rate at the cost of higher employment. However, it cannot sustainably achieve both unemployment, that is below the NAIRU, and if I show you below the NAIRU, so this is below the NAIRU, and low stable inflation at the same time. Obviously, there is a conflict between these two macroeconomic objectives, between the unemployment rate and the rate of inflation. So the trade-off between unemployment and inflation is summarized by the short-term Phillips curve. Say the economy is at point A. Let's start from here. So the economy is at point A. The unemployment rate is equal to NAIRU, and inflation is low and stable. Where is inflation? This is the inflation. Low and stable. The central bank could use monetary policy to stimulate the economy and reduce the unemployment rate below the NAIRU. Yes, it is the case. Below the NAIRU. So as a result, the economy moves from point A to point B. In the short run, where the unemployment rate is lower and inflation is higher, the further the unemployment is below the NAIRU, the faster inflation will accelerate. So in the long run, however, there is no trade-off between unemployment and inflation, because households and firms expect that a lower unemployment rate will cause higher inflation. That is, they have factored this into their inflation expectations. Workers now demand increase in wages in anticipation of higher future inflation. And as the cost of their labor increases, some firms will reduce the number of people they employ. Okay, so this continues until the unemployment rate equals the NAIRU again. This is the point, the NAIRU again. And inflation stabilizes at a higher level, as shown by point C, The unemployment rate will always return to the NAIRU in the long run, and any attempt to lower the unemployment rate below the NAIRU will increase inflation. Therefore, the long-run Phillips curve can be thought as a straight vertical line. Okay, let's take a detailed example or a complex example. In this case, as can be seen in figure 10.4, an increase in demand to reduce unemployment. So, and take the economy along SRPC from A to B. This is SRPC1. So, from SRPC from A to B, decreasing unemployment but raising inflation from 0 to P1. So, workers then demand higher wages so that firms' costs rise, leading to less employment, B to C. This is the movement, B to C. But no reduction in prices. As you can see, there is no reduction in prices at P1. Any further attempt to increase demand moves the economy along SRPC1 and from point C to D, and moves the economy along SRPC from C to D and then E. So this process is continuous. Okay, so this is the more detailed version of long run Phillips curve, also included the shifts in SRPC. Okay, if we talk about what could we can write in AO3, that is the evaluation part. So as far as the evaluation is concerned, we have to know about who are monetarists. So a monetarist is an economist who believes that the money supply is the primary driver of an economic activity, and that controlling the money supply is the most effective way to manage the economy and to combat inflation. Their core belief is monetarists believe that changes in the money supply have a direct and powerful effect on inflation, economic growth, and overall economic stability. The monetarists advocate for a focus on monetary policy, which involves controlling the money supply through tools like interest rate to manage inflation and economic growth. And talking about the key figures, Milton Friedman is a prominent figure associated with monetarism, and his ideas have significantly influenced economic thought and policy. Now, in contrasting with Keynesian, monetarism is often contrasted with the Keynesian economics, which emphasizes the role of government spending and fiscal policy in managing the economy. So now we have to take a look of evaluation. What can we write in evaluation part? So monetarists like the Milton Friedman, however, claim that although there might be a trade-off in the short run, this was not true in the long run. The Friedman argued that in the long run, any attempt to reduce unemployment by increasing demand would just lead to higher inflation. He felt that the only way, therefore, to reduce unemployment permanently was to reduce inflation first. So, to do this, policymakers must look beyond monetary policy to the government policy that more directly influence the narrow, non-accelerated inflation rate of unemployment. So this has influenced the central banks in their targeting of inflation. So this is about today's topic. We have covered the short-run Phillips curves and the long-run Phillips curve. Hope this give you a very good understanding of it. And in next video, we are going to come up with another topic. Take care.